good morning. Almost feels like a Hollywood star to come in here on this runway with all the lights and a gorgeous crowd and the music and everything. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about my favorite topic. And a word of warning, I get passionate about when we talk about responsible investment. I know it sounds a bit sad to some people, but I do. And when I get passionate and I get excited, I start talking really, really fast because there's so much I want to say. And I am looking forward to the Q&A session at the end of my speech. So please start thinking about those questions so we can actually have a conversation, a dialogue. So any comment, any critique, any questions, warmly, warmly welcome. My topic today is massive, and I only have 20 minutes to talk about this huge topic. And it comes in two phases. First, talking about monetary policy side, which is not my area of expertise, and then talking about the investment side, my bread and butter topic. So I'm trying to get through the first part as quickly as possible so we can get to the point that I really, really, really want to talk to you about today. So what has central banks to do with climate change? We have seen sort of like a change in the discourse in the last few years. It wasn't so surprising to see earlier central bankers saying that, oh, climate change has nothing to do with us. We don't care about it. These sort of like headlines have been taken from fairly large newspapers and some smaller newspapers stating that, okay, this is not an issue for us. But the tide has changed. Central bankers now see that climate change has got an effect on the economy. It has got an effect on price stability, and it has got a meaning for central banks. And central banks need to think about these issues as well. Price stability is the primary objective, but we know that climate change will change prices. It has got an effect on so many levels. And therefore, it is vital that central banks do think about this topic as well. The main task is, like I said, the price stability. But that is the task of the European Central Bank as well. But knowing the amount of hurricanes and floods and all these sort of like physical changes we're seeing is actually changing the prices as well. And we've already seen examples like food prices increasing, energy, housing prices increasing. So it is natural for central banks to look at these issues as well. Some people are saying that, well, actually, no, well, do you look at price stability, but why then do you talk about the Green Deal? Why do you talk about the green issues? Well, central banks have got a secondary mandate, or they can, within their mandate, to support other policies as well, as long as they maintain their first priority, which is the price stability. So for example, if we think about the ECB, ECB is supporting the EU policies without jeopardizing the price stability. We have climate law, so it is natural for central banks then to look at these issues as well. ECB has published, as part of its strategy review in July last year, a very significant, ambitious yet realistic climate action plan. I mean, I could spend 20 minutes on each and every one of these topics alone, but I strongly, strongly welcome you to go to the ECB website and have a look at these different sort of like action plans or sort of like these different routes and the roadmap that ECB is taking. And I would like to point out the last part of this slide to be implemented by 2024 at latest. So on the ECB website, you will find the roadmap, you will find the action plan, you will find information on the reasonings, motivations behind this action plan, and you will also see a timetable. So ECB is doing what it says, and it's meaning business when it talks about these topics as well. I would like to say also that the EU or the ECB does not have monopoly on this topic. This is a global issue. I was trying to come up with really sort of like a clever way of putting GHG somewhere there, and I started with a global, and I got the green, and I couldn't come up with an H, so it ended up being GPG, as in global push for green. But I do think that it is a sort of like a relevant point to make, that no matter where you look globally, you will find Green Deal or some sort of taxonomy, initiatives already implemented, legislation already implemented or planned. And I know, I do apologize, it's unfair to put Africa in one bucket and Asia into one bucket. We're talking about huge, huge diverse economies here. However, the point here is not to put country by country on what is happening. It's just to say that change is happening. It is already, we already see jurisdictions that have got these green deals already implemented. I would like to point out that there are countries that had a green taxonomy before the EU green taxonomy was in place. The last bit, I think it's really, really important. We always, quite often talk about US as being behind, not interested on climate topics. And what Annette was just talking about earlier, there were on several slides how some North Americans didn't feel some of these topics as significant as their European counterparts. The SEC has done 2 consultations. They're doing the second right now on mandatory disclosure on climate topics. And if ever you want to step outside of your sustainability or green bubble, I would suggest to go to the SEC website to look at the comments people have written for and against this mandatory disclosure. It is quite eye-opening to see that not everyone is warmly embracing the additional disclosure, and not everyone sees the value in this. Although the majority of the commenters so far seems to be very much in favor, and I wouldn't be too surprised to see this kind of disclosure becoming mandatory in the US markets as well. So, what does it look for a European investor? So, there we go. For a European investor, this whole Green Deal and the sustainability topic. This slide looks really, really complicated, and I didn't realize it had all these animations, so let's just keep going and going and going, and we can see there's a lot of things happening on this slide. What I would like to point out is that there is a lot of emphasis on the green, and a lot of that is actually to do with disclosure. But also, we have a lot of voluntary reporting frameworks, and those can be seen on the right-hand side of this slide. And these are kind of like interlinked. Your company might not be affected by all of these. Not all investors, not all companies are affected by these changes. But let me tell you, stakeholders are demanding more. And even if you're not directly affected by this, there will be that indirect effect coming from the stakeholder demands that you need to be reporting more, telling more about the important issues and the meaningful issues and the significant issues and the material issues that are sort of affecting your company. There are the net zero targets. They are voluntary, but they are gaining momentum if you look at the global initiatives. So we have a lot of UN-convened net zero, industry-specific net zero initiatives and alliances. So for example, the Banking Alliance already has got 40% of the global banking assets behind the net zero initiative. 40%. To me, that seems quite a lot. We have Insurers Alliance. We have Asset Owners Alliance. We have Asset Managers Alliance. So we have a lot of these initiatives and alliances that have pledged net zero. And that will put pressure on companies who have not done a net zero target, who have possibly not disclosed too much information when it comes to their environmental footprint. Also, on the left-hand corner, bottom there's a yellow small quadrant making its way towards the center stage. It will take time before it gets to center stage. Green is what we're talking about today. Green issues are sort of like dominating the discussion, but make no mistake, social issues are there as well, and the social taxonomy is going to be part of the discussion in more forceful going forward. So these are sort of like topics that European investors need to think about. They need to report on these, which means that they need to get the information from the companies they're invested in. So my point here today, or what I want to show about this slide, that even though it might look complicated, it's all about data. It's all about disclosing what is material, what is important, and how do you convey that message to your stakeholders. And not just investors, but to your overall stakeholders as well. So the second part of my speech today is about central banks as investors. Yes, central banks can be significant investors. And the motivations or the reasons why central banks invest vary from one central bank to another. You have the foreign reserves, some have pension funds, some actually need the returns from their investments to finance their own operations. So the needs and the wants of central banks differ. Does responsibility play a role in it? Well, depending who you ask. The left-hand side of the slide has got a graph taken from London School of Economics article that was published 2 weeks ago. And it's based on a survey or a study, research conducted by an NGO. Looking at that doesn't look too promising. I mean, you have one central bank being the best of the bunch, and their classification is, what was it again? SRI policy to be improved. And that is supposed to be the best. And then you have two central banks being in the category of policy to be significantly improved. And then the rest is even less than that. Doesn't look too good, in my opinion, if that is all the information you would have. And by the way, Bank of Finland is in the second category, if one of you wondered where we were. It was done before we published our interim climate targets. Maybe we'd get to the first class if they would do it today, don't know. But this is an NGO. And they have their definition, and they have their policy, they have the agenda, how they want to classify these things. So I would suggest, in addition to this first graph, to look at the second table, which is done by the central banks and supervisors network for greening the financial system. A mouthful, I know, NGFS, as we'd like to call it, makes it a bit easier. So they've done these surveys a couple of times now, and they've asked why central banks think that responsible investment is important. And the survey respondent number is not actually showing on the table. It's fairly similar. It's about 40 on the NGFS study, roughly the same figure for the NGO study as well. And you can see that reputational risk, to set a good example, and protecting against sustainability risks are the most three main motivations for central banks to think about responsibility when it comes to their investments. So even though the first graph is kind of like hinting that there wouldn't be too much action, yet again, you have central banks who are saying that, hey, we've noticed this, we need to do something, and we need to have that action in place. And that is exactly what we're seeing today. As an example, I would like to talk about, surprise, surprise, Bank of Finland. Yeah, it's the one that I know best, having worked there for almost 2 years now. So this is just to show that what we mean, how we define responsible investment when we talk about responsible investment. We have about 11 billion euros of assets under management, and it is divided between gold, foreign reserves, which means fixed income mostly, equities, and real estate. We have selected 3 responsible investment approaches that we find most suitable for us. ESG integration, not surprising. So it means that our portfolio managers look at ESG issues when they make investment decisions. So even though my title sounds very, very fancy, Principal Responsible Investment Specialist, My job is not to select companies into our portfolio. My job is not to make a list approved by Anna and hand it out to the portfolio managers, and then they can go with that list and do whatever they want. No, it's important that the portfolio managers look at the ESG topics as they see relevant, because we know that these ESG issues are not just risks, but they're also opportunities, and they have a financial link. So it makes sense for the portfolio manager to look at them rather than to have someone who doesn't have that sort of like link to the portfolio, like myself. Obviously, the ESG topics are often quite complex, so it's good to have an expert, a specialist like me, to support the portfolio managers, to help them, to make sure that they have access to the relevant information. They know where to find that data. They know how, that they can come to me and ask questions, and we can debate about an issue. We can debate about a company, for example, if we want to, or if we're thinking of a new investment product. I'm involved in that discussion to making sure that the ESG is at the adequate level. The second approach we have is the thematic investment. Not surprising for central banks. You will have the majority of central banks, when you talk to them about ESG and you talk about responsible investments, they will say, oh yes, we're invested in green bonds. Good, but not the only answer. So it's not just about green bonds, it's about sustainability bonds, it's about sustainability-linked bonds, it's about products that have got that sustainability embedded in them. Then the last approach we have is norm-based screening and exclusion. So we have a minimum requirement for all of our investments, and that is to follow international norms. And if a company fails to do that, then we have an issue with them. So either we remove it from our investment universe, or we can think about an engagement. Central banks haven't been very, very active on the engagement side previously, and Bank of Finland hasn't done a lot of engagements before. It's been more to do with, let's just exclude the ones that don't fit in. We, just like everyone else, need to start thinking that, okay, maybe the active part is something that we need to be considering as well. Becoming more active owners to make sure that the change happens. We heard it in the previous speech, change is required, change is needed, and the same goes here. Investors need to change their approaches, they need to change the way they look at the portfolio in order to create the impact. So, do not worry, I'm not going to go through every single bullet point here. It's just to show that it's not just about the words, it's about the action. So on the left-hand side, action points already delivered. And then on the right-hand side is the ones that we're working on right now. There are a few points that I would like to point out on the action points delivered. It is that Bank of Finland is a signatory to the UN-supported Principles for Responsible Investment. There are, I think the last count was 4,000 plus signatories globally, and only a handful of central banks. Central banks haven't been very active on publicly committing to these kind of principles. Bank of Finland is one of the first. Then also the responsibility added as a fourth investment objective. That makes my life much, much easier. I do not need to go to the board, I do not need to go to the portfolio managers and convince them about the importance of ESG and responsibility, because it's one of our investment objectives. Normally, when you look at a central bank and they talk about their investment activities and they talk about their investment objectives, they mention three. One could say it's like a holy trinity. You have the liquidity, you have the return, and you have the safety or security, depending on who you talk to, as in capital preservation. We have added responsibility because we see that there's a value in that as well. So whenever we make investment decisions, we need to make sure that those investments do fulfill all of the four objectives, all of the criteria we have in place. On the current and future action points, we have had a very extensive data procurement that finished earlier this year, and now we're going to implement that into our processes, into our sort of like IT. We have decided to do some sectoral restrictions based on our climate target. That I probably should have said about the net zero target that we have. Yet again, something that is not common to see central banks so far, but I do think that maybe after we came out with this broad long-term target, others will follow suit. At least I warmly welcome them. So in order for us to reach the net zero target by 2050 at latest, we need to have different viewpoints and asset class specific targets in mind. And these sectoral restrictions are part of that, and we need to implement them. And we've stated that we will implement them by the end of this year. And we will continue working very actively in international collaborations, in working groups, in order to sort of like bring a responsible investment forward and making sure that we get more economic actors on board, and we get more money behind all these initiatives, because we all know the more AUM you have behind something, the more important investors you have behind an initiative or a target, the more you get listened to. Your voice becomes louder. As a concluding remark, I would like to sort of like remind us all that we're talking about a long-term phenomenon that permanently changes our economic environment. So it makes sense for central banks to be concerned and interested in this issue as well. Central banks have their role to play. Every single actor has got their role to play. Maybe we are not the most important ones. Maybe like the elected officials, governments, have got the most powerful tools in their hands, but that doesn't mean that others shouldn't do anything, that it should be just, let's wait what the governments do and then react. No, we all need to do our share. The ECB strategy review highlights these climate change topics, and they do put in a concrete roadmap and an action plan. And it is ambitious, but it is realistic. And I would, like I said, strongly welcome you to follow what is happening on that front as well. We, at the Bank of Finland, we have set our carbon neutrality target for our own investments, and it complements really nicely our overall climate program to do with banks' own activities. And I hope today what I have managed to sort of like convey here is the message that change is happening, disclosure, or so like added disclosure is happening. It's not an EU monopoly. We're all facing it. Instead of trying to fight it, we should see the benefits of it, embrace it, and not trying to hide our heads in the sand and thinking it will go away. It will not go away. There's more to come. But there are benefits to be had on the sort of like added disclosure because it gives us more data, it helps investors, it helps stakeholders, and more importantly, it actually helps the economic actors themselves, as in the reporting entities, because what you measure, you manage, and when you don't manage something that has got financial value, you lose it. And therefore, I think it's really important that we do look at climate also as not just a risk, but also an opportunity view. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was very informative. You managed to pack a lot of information into a short, brief presentation. And now I would like to take questions from our CGI Insights22 audience, both virtual and live. Do we have any questions? If not, not to worry, I have some. I'm dying to ask. Here we go, right in the front row. Yes, please, if we could get a microphone. Thank you.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for a really thought-inspiring presentation. But my name is Ville Huovinen. I work for VR, so for transport. So what do you think are the most important mechanisms to drive low carbon in transport, especially as it's very important in Finland, for example, from air and car to rail? And are they sufficient now? What do you think needs to be done in addition?
Well, I mean, if we look at the net zero pledges that countries have made, and then we look at the national determined contributions they have made, we know that there's a discrepancy, that we need to have more done. On the transport side, I think it is vital to understand that we can't solve this issue simply by banning something, but it needs to be like a multitude of different options. And personally, I like the idea, for example, not needing to fly shorter distances, but we wouldn't. The speed like rail would be a solution for that. As in, what is most convenient and efficient way to transport a lot. In Finland, we know, for example, that we have long distances, and maybe some big lorries, electric lorries, might not be the most suitable thing in Finland considering our winters. Yet again, they could be a very good solution somewhere else. So I don't think we should try to do a one-size-fits-all type of a solution, but to see what is most efficient and what is the most pragmatic solution for each and every I'm not saying problem, but challenge. Because I do think that trying to come up with one size fits all will create more and more problems. And not every investor needs to do exactly what we've done. We've selected, like when I said in my presentation, we selected the most suitable approaches for us. And then you look at the Finnish pension insurance companies, huge investors, they will have slightly different approach to their investment. So it's the same. You choose the ones that are most suitable for every occasion, and most suitable does have that efficiency element in it. There was a question at the back, I think.
Hello, my name is Satu Kiiska, I'm from CGI. And as you said, it's all about data. So can you comment on the data sources that you use and the quality? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so the data procurement that we did, part of the Eurosystem, we have 2 different data providers. And why 2 is because the data is different. Even though we're talking about the same issue, we're talking about the same company, the data can look very, very different. As an example, I used to work for another big investor, and we did carbon calculations on our equity portfolio, and we used 2 different data providers and calculating the portfolio emissions. And the difference was 20%. So the other one was giving 20% higher numbers than the other one. And to me, as an investor, if you have something that is different by 20%, to me, that's a lot. And then when I've been talking to some client scientists, they've said, oh, that's actually pretty good. They was that close. And I'm like, hang on a second. If I'm supposed to use this data as part of the investment decision-making, how can I do that if the data is so all over the place? One has to remember, carbon accounting is not finished, not by a mile. It needs to be done in order for us to know where the problems are and how we get to the better quality data and how we improve the coverage. So that is not an excuse of not doing the carbon counting, the calculations, because, oh, well, the data is not perfect. I would like to say that our current accounting standards were not created in 1 day or 1 year or even 10 years, much longer than that. Carbon emission calculation for investment purposes has a much shorter history. So therefore, let's give it a bit of a slack. And that's why it's important to use multiple data sources in order for you to get as good quality data as possible. There are specialized companies that provide that data, the ones that the Eurosystem is using now, called ISS and Carbon for Finance, but there are many others as well. So please do not take this as a marketing for those two, two data providers.
Wonderful answer, and a very good point about, I think, this idea of resilience and change and challenges, which is that there are often many places to look for answers, and there is not one size fits all. And part of being able to deal with challenges is being able to look at the different data and, put it in its context and realize that one is not always the right thing for everybody. Thank you.
I would one more comment here about looking at one thing. I didn't mention the ESG ratings. That has been a lot of debate. The ESG rating agencies are not the ratings are not correlated, and so on and so on. Puts me also wants me to say one thing. You have equity analysts, for example, doing buy recommendations and sell recommendations and hold recommendations, increase, decrease, whatnot. And they don't tend to correlate and agree with one another either. So should we be surprised when we look at a massive issue like ESG that those analysts or those recommendations or those views should be correlating and should be equal? They shouldn't be. And no one should ever make an investment decision based on an external recommendation alone. Who would go and buy something just because an analyst said, oh, it's a good buy? I hope you don't do that. Don't do it with ESG ratings either. Just because something is a AAA on an ESG rating scale doesn't mean, oh, ship it in. I want to buy everything. No, absolutely not. Always do your homework. Always do your homework, even when ESG is not a license to not do your homework. Climate change topics, even if someone seems to be very, very good at mitigating, adapting, being the greenest company in the world, is not a license for you to say, ship it in. Do your homework.